what I love.
Hello, I'm Scruffy, and today I'm delving into one of my favorite games, the one that got me into adaptive video game music in the first place, Pikmin 2. This game experimented with pretty much every idea that the first Pikmin game had introduced, especially the music implementation. You see, Pikmin 1 had a theme for each area of the game, and because they were all created with MIDI instruments that play back in real time, they could add layers to increase the music's intensity while you're combating a dangerous creature, or they could replace layers to decrease the music's intensity when the in-game day is almost over. In Pikmin 2, there are plenty more environments to explore because of the extensive cave systems under the overworld areas. Not only did that require more music, it needed to do something special while you're underground. What's so special about these caves? Well, they're set up a bit like mini roguelikes, in Pikmin format. You bring in whatever army of Pikmin you want, but you can't add or replace Pikmin in your army once you're underground, and the in-game day timer doesn't progress. Ahead of you is a gauntlet of tightly packed little sublevels to prove you have the proper planning and Pikmin skills, the proper dandori, to go without reinforcements for a while. The other reason I call this a mini roguelike is that a majority of these sublevels in these cave systems are randomly assorted. Each one will have a set theme to its terrain, like a winding network of burrowed soil tunnels, or a bathroom-like assortment of tiles and pools, or a hardwood floor littered with toy blocks. That theme determines the set of modular terrain puzzle pieces that are chosen and constructed into an enclosed space, procedurally. Then, a pool of enemies and items are also assigned randomly to certain waypoints in this space, making sure that all treasures for the sublevel have a secure place to appear. So each time you visit this sublevel, the stuff you'll find will be the same, but you'll find it in a different order, usually meaning you'll have to re-strategize how to approach it with your Pikmin. And just as the terrain is randomly assorted this way, the music for caves is procedurally sequenced. Yes, Hajime Wakai and Kazumi Totaka composed tracks of music that exist as puzzle pieces, and Mitsuhiro Hikino developed a system that seamlessly constructs those pieces in random orders, meaning the music in a cave sublevel never plays exactly the same way on two different visits. And it's still adaptive. Layers get added based on the action happening in the game. That's quite complex, so let's break all of it down using an example. A piece of music you can hear in the Whole of Beasts Sublevel 1, along with several other soil-themed sublevels. This tune is commonly referred to as Cautious Cavern, but that's not an official name. Its internal file name is cavesoil_00_0.cnd, but that's also a bit of a mouthful. So my collaborator on this video, Waffles, and several other Pikmin enthusiasts have been coming up with some more concise names that are truer to the file names and to the ways the music is used in-game, so I'm going to use those names in this video. That means I'm calling this tune Soil 1. It was written by Wakai, which we can tell from the MIDI samples used. They come from his Kurzweil K2500R and Roland SC88. So, you'll hear a shaker giving the pulse, and it can only play that one gesture, so it never changes. On top of that, you'll hear some low pizzicato strings, giving us some gestures that tend toward the note F. These do change. In fact, there are 6 different gestures it can play, sequenced in a random order. That gives us some bass and some direction. This instrument also follows a certain on-off rule, dictating how many gestures it can play in a row before playing rest gestures, which are just a certain number of beats of silence. For this pizzicato instrument, it can play 4 gestures in a row before playing 2 gestures of silence. This way it sounds a bit more reminiscent of live improvisation, with its undulation between gesture and rest. On top of that, we have our melody, played on an English horn sample. This instrument has 10 different gestures it can play. These are not only assorted in a random order, but every 2 beats, there's a chance that a new gesture can interrupt another, constructing a new melody out of the spliced melodic bits. And it can play 2 gestures before playing 1 silent gesture. But even if a silent gesture occurs before a sounding gesture is finished, it won't cut off the sounding gesture. So sometimes, even with this established on-off rule, a short silent gesture can pass by without interrupting a long chain of melodic gestures, constructing a longer melody that still eventually cuts off before overstaying its welcome. There's also a hard rule that the same gesture can't be played more than twice in a row to avoid repetitiveness. But some tracks can feasibly skirt around that by having duplicate gestures to choose from. That is the sort of system at work throughout nearly all of the cave music in Pikmin 2, constructing music in a random order that still maintains a balanced, periodic structure. On top of that, let's see what adaptive changes get added based on the action in the game. Keep in mind that the following parameters also apply to above-ground music. When the active leader is near an enemy creature, a cautious, chaotic instrument will be added, almost like an alarm that danger is nearby. In the case of Soil 1, this is a piano that randomly assorts through 4 gestures uninterrupted. If the beast engages you in combat, some intense percussion will be added, which is often more than one track. For instance, here it's a snare drum, toms, and a kick drum that each randomly assort through 4, 2, and 1 gestures on their own, respectively, without regarding the others. Truly the sound of a chaotic battle. If you're nearby Pikmin who are working on clearing an obstacle, like a bramble wall, a more driving, rhythmic instrument will be added to score the Pikmin's engagement. In our example here, it's a second bass instrument, recontextualizing the harmony by playing an unwavering gesture in B-flat. And if Pikmin are carrying a treasure, that same layer will fade in close to those Pikmin, and in addition, a new instrument will double the melody anywhere in the cave, such as this synth here. Now for some crazier global changes to the music. The MIDI tracks will play with straight beats as you play as Olimar, and swung beats as you play as Louis or the President. If one of those leaders has less than half their health remaining, the track will play at half tempo for them. If you want changes like these to happen cleanly and immediately, that's pretty much only possible with real-time MIDI playback. And a much harder to notice detail, if you brought in a Pikmin army greater than 10 in number, and then you lost enough Pikmin to bring this number down below 10, some notes in the melody will be procedurally removed, making it sound as incomplete as your Pikmin forces are. It's quite a blow to your morale if you're able to hear that while you play. So, the game is running checks for all these parameters as you play, so the cave music can respond dynamically to your progress while staying randomly assorted. The only adaptive parameters from overworld music that cave music does not have are a music box layer for a sunset variation, since time doesn't progress underground, and adding a layer of strings when you're near burgeoning spiderwort plants, since those don't occur underground. Although all of Wakai's tracks in the game have a layer of MIDI strings that seem to be for that purpose, they're just muted. So maybe they were originally intended to occur underground. Soil 1 also happens to have another muted track, an organ that can play up to 15 different patterns, the most patterns of any gesture set in the game. But perhaps it was eventually decided it conflicted too much with the English horn. These compositions do tend to lean on the minimalist side, after all. But that's the thing, making these kinds of decisions would be easier now. Mitsuhiro Hikino's system of rules probably made it easier to extrapolate more and more cave music. Not because any of the creative process was automated, but because the constraints help a composer think creatively. For example, in another cave tune, Concrete 2, the melodic instrument follows a very consistent pattern of 3 sounding gestures and 1 silent gesture. So Totaka cleverly wrote the sounding gestures to be long, multi-measure phrases with some notes that could be skipped over unless they play during a silent gesture, creating a secret part of the melody. And just like the previous example, this track has its own instrument for enemies, its own drum set and a melodic double for combat, and another instrument and another melodic double for Pikmin tasks. Here's another example. In another Totaka tune, Toy Railroad, commonly called Railroad Room, the same on-off pattern is used, but the melodic instruments only have one gesture they can play. So even in this randomized rule set, they will always play a consistent melody in the same pattern, appropriate for a railroad room. Also, due to sets of gestures being stored in a separate list, multiple cave music tracks can use the same gestures. That leads to some easy reuse of gestures, such as the toms in Soil 1, also being used in Soil 2. But it also leads to some creative repurpose of gestures. For instance, the pizzicato from Soil 1 is used as a bass marimba in Metal 1. And the percussion track from Metal 1 is used as a melodic track in Toy. Makes for a very chaotic, atonal melody. Now, lastly, I'd also like to mention that some cave tracks explicitly follow different rules to help certain sublevels stand out from the rest. For example, if you encounter a boss enemy in a sublevel, Pikmin 2's boss theme will overtake the sublevel theme as long as you're near that enemy. And the music dynamically follows the boss's actions rather than your own. If there are multiple bosses in a sublevel, you won't even get the victory jingle that concludes the boss theme until every last boss there is beaten. On most final floors of caves, the music is cut out except for the boss music to emphasize the finality of the boss. There are also some sublevels focused on regrouping and nurturing your Pikmin forces with no enemies present, and they use a specific track called Relax. It's written to sound rhythmless with extremely calming instruments. And even if you encounter beasts that you could battle, like Mamutas, you don't hear any adaptive combat layers. You only get an extra layer while carrying treasure. And finally, there's the Submerged Castle, a cave from the perplexing pool that isn't quite like the others. Its entrance rests in water, so you can only bring blue Pikmin into it, but inside you encounter hazards not meant for blue Pikmin. And if you spend more than 5 minutes in any of its 5 sublevels, the formidable, otherworldly, unstoppable juggernaut of a boss, the Water Wraith, will appear and relentlessly chase you down. Blue Pikmin can't even get a lick in on it. All you can do is run from it and try to salvage all the treasure and Pikmin you can until the final floor. It's quite a different narrative from all the other caves, so the music is also noticeably different. You'll hear a strange microtonal composition featuring these off-human sounding voices humming eerily. And when the Water Wraith spawns, you'll hear this alarming chase music built out of all sorts of altered diminished chords in staccato strings. And the creepiest part is, these don't adaptively change, ever. There's just 5 minutes of creepy ambience and then unswerving pursuit. Every sublevel, until the final one where you finally treat the Water Wraith as a proper boss battle. After establishing this whole system of procedural music in all sorts of quirky, adaptable styles, It really hits effectively to subvert that entire system for this one odd story of a cave. And that's really why I wanted to break down this musical system. It holds such charming insight into music that only video games could accommodate. MIDI is to this day a really effective way to instigate changes to your music in real time, especially large-scale changes like rhythmic feel or tempo that would otherwise be destructive to streamed audio. And after you've established a big collection of music rules like this and gotten players comfortable in a world of chill but adaptive procedural jams, the most powerful move you can make is to take that all away for a moment and write some completely different rules and different music for a specific area. Suddenly that will make players pay attention, and for good reason. I hope you've enjoyed this little look into the systems behind Pikmin 2's cave music, and I encourage those who have the game to take some time to just listen to some sublevels, find your favorite, and take note how it never quite orders itself the same way twice, but somehow still ends up a coherent piece of music. I don't know, there's just something kind of beautiful about that. And on that note, I'd like to give a big, echoey shout out to my friend Waffles, a resident expert on Pikmin 2 music and sound design who largely inspired this video, helped me with researching and scripting, and provided Logic Pro sessions of cave music that became the audio examples here. Thank you very, very much, and keep up the lovely investigations into what makes Pikmin tick. And I'd also like to thank my patrons on Patreon, who help keep my video making process sustainable. If you'd like to support my work directly and get perks like your credit here, seeing videos early, a vote on what music I arrange, and more behind-the-scenes content, you can visit my Patreon link in this video's description. And with that, I'm Scruffy, and thank you very much for watching.